As you heard a little earlier on in the day, what we're going to do here now is to switch gears a little bit from talking about cross-platform exposure measurement alone and move to the measurement of campaign impact or resonance across media. So first we're going to hear a panel about the strengths and weaknesses and gaps in some of the current approaches, both to the techniques and to our knowledge about what we understand about how cross-platform ad effectiveness works. And then we're going to hear about an innovation that Sim's been pilot testing with Symphony Advanced Media. So to get started, I'd like to introduce the moderator for the panel, Don Gloeckler, the EVP and Chief Research Officer of the ARF. I don't think you'll need this at all, but I'll just...
I don't think I do. Thank you, Jane. It's great to be here today and to talk this subject. It's near and dear to my heart. I was very involved in the Apollo project a few years back, rest in peace. And it's good to see a number of Apollo alumni in the room from Arbitron and Nielsen and other companies along the road. It is my pleasure to moderate this panel. We have a good group, a cross-section of experts that will join me on stage. Jane, I got to give you a little grief. The title is a little odd. What works, and then we're addressing gaps. So I think it's really more about what maybe doesn't work, but we'll talk about what works as well. So I want to introduce our panel. First, I want to introduce Catharine Hayes. Catharine is the Executive Director at Wharton's School Future of Advertising program at the University of Pennsylvania. Catharine. Aaron Fetters, who is the Director of Insights and Analytics Solutions Center at Kellogg's in Battle Creek, Michigan. Aaron, thank you. And finally, Rob Jayson, the Chief Data Officer at ZenithOptimedia Worldwide. Zenith, thank you. Have a seat, Rob. So glad to have them join me on stage. I'm not going to start with my most creative question. It's probably, in fact, the least creative question that I have for the day. But it seems like an appropriate place to start with this question. And we'll always start with the advertiser, Aaron, so I'll jump to you first. What are
You're not asking for money, though, right?
No money. The ARF, we'll get you on that later. The question to start with for me is, what are the big issues that related to cross-platform measurement that really keep you awake at night? What are the things that bother you as an advertiser?
It's probably the same for any advertiser who's here or thinks about this at any time. I think I would break it down into both. There's tactical issues, there's tactical challenges, and then there's strategic challenges when you think about the gaps in measurement, I guess. We have a great tool at Kellogg's that we use in partnership with all of our agencies called the Integrated Experience Plan, IEPs. And the whole idea of the Integrated Experience Plan is to say, okay, we're going to bring this idea to life, and how is the consumer going to experience this across touch points? So it's, tries to be more than just a campaign. It's a true experience for the consumer. I think the challenge is, without being able to understand the cross-platform performance, I would say in terms of the interconnectedness across the platforms, are we really informing those integrated experience plans as well as we could be, should be, need to be, or are we actually just kind of planning silos of touch points, which is probably more realistic of what we're doing, and we understand how each of those touch point works. I would say fairly well. I know that TV works. I know that digital works. We're starting to learn that mobile works. But we don't know enough about the interconnectedness of each, and that's where I think the challenges, some of the big challenges are. And so that's like I said, there's a tactical piece, which is just how do I reach the most audience as efficiently as possible with my message. There's a more strategic piece of how do I use each of these mediums. So it's maybe not just take a piece of creative and move it from one medium to another. It's what's the right experience in each touch point, and that's the more strategic, I think, side of it that we struggle with.
What you just talked about was very planning, future-focused.
Good point.
Is that what keeps you awake, or is it the evaluation of the program after the fact and assessing the impact?
Well, the only reason that you evaluate after the fact is to drive future plans, to be honest. So it's not so much, I'm not as concerned about that as I would be the real-time optimization, the opportunities for real-time optimization. I mean, we know in digital, and I think Kellogg has done a great job in the digital space of becoming very proactive in use of measurement to drive performance midstream. We've got great examples of being able to take a campaign a few weeks old and start to drive performance up. But we can't do that. We're not doing that across touch points as effectively as what we probably could be. So, yeah, again, I don't worry as much about the after-the-fact measurement. We'll do that. We have to do that for finance, right? But I am more concerned with how do we get better in doing real-time optimization and getting the measures that'll help inform what decisions should I be making each day.
I'm going to put a pin in real time for a minute because we're going to come back to that. I think that's really, really important. Rob, as you think about your clients at Zenith, what's keeping you and therefore them awake? Because I guess it's probably, hopefully it's the same.
Sure, absolutely. I think we classify it in two ways. Our future focus, where we need to get clients, is in two buckets, content and data. Those are the two areas where we really think that there has to be a focus of development. And really, looking back, we're a little bit stuck on as we talked about the Microsoft experience. It can't be a platform experience. It's not all about the platform that you deliver it on. It's not about the device. It's about the content and how do we deliver that content? How do we track the experience of that content and vary that content across different experiences for the consumer? And then secondly, how are we taking the reams and terabytes of data that we get from every different experience, from client data, paid, owned, and earned levels of experience that consumers get, and how do you start to look at the interplay between those pieces of data? And more than just kind of correlation, what's causation between those bits of data, that can allow us to be a little bit more predictive. And those two areas are things that we focus on all the time. And it takes a lot of investment and ideas. And I think some of the things that we've been talking about today, add ID across different pieces of content, will help us to get there in the future, which is great. But I think also just varying that consumer experience and understanding how that consumer experience can be optimized within content is a future-forward kind of look for us.
You use the word causation. I think we often think about advertising effectiveness measurement in terms of the what. Causation takes you to the why.
Right.
Tell me more about that. What are you looking for? What is the...
So there are intermediary measures. I think it's very important for us to clients care about profitable sales correctly, and they should. But it's very difficult for us, as we know from doing all the econometrics and market mix modeling, all that kind of stuff. Advertising is one small part of the overall delivery of profitable sales. So how are we then putting together a communication plan that allows us to understand what has driven the advertising portion, the marketing portion of those sales, and how is that going to vary in the future? Because the marketing plans are all going to change, the competition and the environment, the way consumers behave changes constantly in the future. So we can't rely on the past only, although it might give us a few hints. And the way that consumers are consuming content is changing pretty fast as well. So combine those two things together, you have a lot of variables, which mean that understanding the causation of how consumers respond to media and advertising prompts is very important to us.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point as you think about the content being fresh and new going ahead. I guess it says something about the metadata, sort of the big data that you have to have around your current content,
right,
that might translate to the future content so you can relate it back.
But then you've also got the fact that you're delivering it on constantly evolving platforms. So mobility being a key one that we've already talked about today. And how do you translate successful content to a mobile experience? And knowing that you want consumers to respond differently to that content in the mobile experience, right, then means that you're looking for different signals back from the consumer to show success.
Yeah, very good. Catharine, you're in a unique position because at Wharton you interact not only with marketers or advertisers, but you're talking to academics, you're talking actually across a wide range of industries. What are you hearing as you work with your Future of Advertising organization or some of the advertising effectiveness work that you're doing at Wharton as the hot issues?
Certainly these themes are what we're seeing. And again, as part of this particular program within Wharton, the Future of Advertising program, we really are trying to look ahead as kind of what's coming over the horizon. You're familiar with a project that we have going on called Advertising 2020. And so we've gained a lot of insights by asking over 200 thought leaders around the world, very global in nature and very diverse, as you said, social scientists, marketers, advertising, 2 questions. One is, what should advertising look like in 2020? Not what will it, but what should look like. And secondly, what should we do now to get ready for that future? So that's really been helpful for us too, and you'll be hearing more about that, and encourage you to see our online platform with what the feedback has been. But what's really fascinating is how quickly things are changing, and how people see that what's happening in 2020 are things, even as they thought about what those trends should be, are starting to get ready for it now. So some of the very concrete things are, number one, how the speed of change and how real-time decision-making, and the model that we've talked about is the newsroom model. So really being able to, in real time, make different decisions, see content, and particularly, you were talking about context. What's going on in the world? How is that changing with the relevance of social media? How quickly does a brand need to be reacting and being part of that conversation?
There's that real-time word again. We're going to come back to that, I promise, in a second. You mentioned global. So you're talking to people globally. Aaron, you work globally. Rob, you have clients that work globally. Start with you, Catherine. As you look at global, are the issues the same in developed and developing markets? Do you have different challenges, different things that are bothering the marketers in those different environments?
There are different nuances. One of the things that we're seeing, we have this term called Gloeckler, where the confluence of having a global perspective for a marketer is coming with being really hyper-local. And some of the technologies are really allowing for that with mobile technologies. The second thing that we're seeing is really global centers of excellence, particularly from a technology perspective. So, for example, in India, the fact that the mobile device is just such a huge part of life. It is not a device. It is not mobile. It is a payment system. It's a communication device. It's a community rallying cry. And so how that market is taking a hold of it has been really, really fascinating. We were there a couple of years ago for a roundtable discussion. And then even the micro-local, I think, from what they're saying in terms of dialects and being able to be culturally relevant in very, very micro segments with the kind of technologies and the ways that brands want to connect and be relevant. So.
Interesting. Rob, what do you?
We see. I think it's very true. It's interesting. In the short term, you see much of the same issues globally. So whether we're working in China, we have China is a great example because they're very different infrastructure systems. No Google, no Facebook. Different kinds of the same problem. And the issue for us in the short term is that, frankly, just like this market, a lot of the data is crap. It's very hard to deal with creating data systems when you have somewhat unreliable data coming in. So, in the short term, when you're trying to talk about some of these solutions, we ignore the fact, or we try and skate over the fact that sometimes you're dealing with unreliable data supply. And that issue is global, unfortunately. Where we get to in the long term and how you then start to think about, maybe what's going to go on in 5 years' time, I do think there are global differences in markets depending on how that market is formed and how the structure of that society and what they're looking for is somewhat different. So we do set up different ways to look at content being served, for example, in China as we do in the US. Our plans are not the same, but the short-term issues probably are.
So Aaron, if you have a multi-contact, multi-country campaign, does it take you then, I can't decide which way is going to be better. Is it passive measurement is going to be more effective in that environment? Or survey-based tools, you kind of go to the least common denominator. When you're dealing with lots of cultures and languages and things, it seems like passive might be more important.
This is an interesting discussion on the global part of it because, when we say global, you go in a couple different directions. There's not that much of a difference in measuring something in the U.S. and the U.K. and Australia. countries are fairly equivalent when it comes to what kind of data do I have access to, how are consumers behaving, things like that. It's the developing world, I think, is where, you talk about the Indias, the Chinas, the Brazils, where, I mean, this discussion, this is like a nice discussion to have, because in those markets, I mean, at least for a Kellogg, like the things that we want to measure and look at are much more fundamental than cross-platform measurement, I think, right? In those markets, I want to know what my distribution is. I want to know, how I'm performing with the retailers. I want to know at a very high level, do I even have brand awareness in these markets? So, it's kind of like, I view this whole discussion about cross-platform measurement as a very nice conversation to have, because if we're able to focus on that, like, we've figured a lot of other stuff out, right? So this is like the icing on the cake,
right.
Whereas some of these other markets, it's much more about the fundamentals. Like, we got to measure the fundamentals and make sure we're driving business, a sound business approach, and then we can get to, as you said, there's a lot of things that drive purchase and consumption of products that are outside of above-the-line advertising. So,
one thing that it raises that I just wanted to mention, that as part of the project and the way that we think about the future of advertising, we've decided to put it in quotes, because the very definition of advertising really needs to have a very different, whole new mental model. And by thinking of it narrowly, it really keeps us sort of cemented in the past, whereas we think of it as, and we think marketers, and we think that a more enlightened approach to it going forward is to think about it as all touch points, from packaging to customer service to employees, with social media making companies completely transparent, and the speed with which the interactions between all of those different elements come together. By trying to narrow it down and thinking of advertising too narrowly, I think you miss some of those points, and especially in areas where you're trying to have, create movements, and so where what your advertisement is and what your in-store type of activity is, how you're engaging the people in particular markets, that all has to come together in terms of how you do it.
Let's flow with that a little bit. I wasn't going to go there, but let's flow there a second. I was eventually going to get there, but I think it's really interesting, because when we think about cross-platform effectiveness, often there's a tendency to think about the synergistic effect of one screen versus another screen, reinforcing the same message. But I guess, Aaron and Rob, with your clients, often that's not the case. You're using one screen or one medium to brand, reinforce the brand message, and you're using some other medium or the package or whatever to try to induce trial. They're serving different purposes, the various parts of the campaign.
Yeah, ideally, yeah.
How does that affect what we're talking about here in terms of advertising effectiveness?
I think it has a big effect on what we're talking about. Ideally, absolutely, you're planning in that manner, where there's a role for each touch point in my integrated experience plan. But what that means is, when you talk about measurement, you've got to back up and say, well, okay, what is the objective for this touch point? What am I trying to achieve with this touch point, right? So mobile may very well be, we would maybe classify it as a digital shopper environment, where I'm going to actually put more of a, whether it's mobile couponing or something that's more call to action based on mobile, but that started with a TV campaign that raised awareness, et cetera. When you get to measurement, now you've got probably two different vendors at least measuring. Did your medium do what you were expecting it to do? You maybe are talking about similar metrics, but most likely I'm starting to compare apples and oranges. I have no kind of vision into the overlap in people. I mean, what ESPN already is doing, I think is great, and if that comes to life, it's going to be really breakthrough for us, for advertisers, to understand. Did the person on mobile, were they exposed on TV, and did that make them more likely to engage in the mobile experience? But we don't have vision into that today, and as long as we kind of have separate research and measurement companies working on separate issues, we can't drive to a standard like holistic measurement of the total experience. Like, how do we measure the experience, that full experience? So it's a challenge.
I think you're absolutely right. I think the other side, I come from the agency world, and you also have to make sure that you're actually getting what you pay for. I mean, that's part of our responsibility as a client, as an agency to our clients, is to go out there and say, as well as measuring, most importantly, what effect did it have, but also did you get what you paid for? So how much faith do we have in the ability to measure as the media market fragments increasingly across platforms, by mobile, by even on TV? The giant amount of fragmentation means we really have to be much more sure. This is where passive comes in potentially, is you have to be sure that you're getting a reliable measure of who's been present in fact, so you're getting a better measure of whether you're getting your money's worth in terms of exposure in the first place.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. What I experience right now a lot is there's a lot of shiny new object syndrome kind of going on, right? Because there's an explosion of places that I could choose to invest as an advertiser, whether it's Shazamable ads or whatever it might be. And a lot of marketers get very excited about these new shiny new objects, things that they can go try out, but we don't think through, well, how am I going to measure, did I get what I paid for? And do you even understand why you would engage in that activity? Because if you don't understand that, we can't even set up the measurement. So I see that happening a lot, and I think that's the right time to have this conversation because it is exploding. You're right.
So at a very fundamental basis, Rob, you started to get into a couple of interesting things. How do we get a sense for both the effect, the exposure, confirming the right people in the right buckets? Who was exposed, who saw the impression or whatever it is, and especially as we look across the various touch points as you were talking about, Aaron. And then the second piece of it is determining that impact that combined impact of those exposures. What have we achieved so far as an industry to address those challenges? What have been the successes? We're starting to see some work that has already talked about, but what can we look back and say, okay, that's moving in the right direction. That's good, and then we'll talk a minute about, well, okay, where else do we need to go? Anybody?
I mean, from an agency perspective, I would say, what's nice to see, for example, in the digital world, where we've moved somewhat away from things like clicks onto, much more nuanced measures of digital success, and our ability to look on search as to placement, but also result and end result from that, and our ability to start to trade against measures which are more significant to the client in terms of a consumer result than a straight click. And time spent and quality of engagement all become vital resources. Our ability to target accurately and use DMPs to start to talk to and over again to deliver a story to consumers via the digital is great. The efforts here to start to properly measure how well we're exposing consumers to advertising, to looking at whether we're adding in consumer-based research to TV exposures is great. All of those things tend to move us in a more of a quality of exposure environment, more than just a straight simple action, a click, for example.
So I want to throw out one, Don, that often gets kind of thrown under the bus, I think, a little bit, but market mix modeling. I mean, the continuing evolution, I think, of the results that we see from market mix modeling is as a big step towards us at least beginning to understand the relative value and effectiveness I get out of each touch point. But it obviously comes with its limitations in terms of how frequently would you run a market mix model. It tells you the what, it doesn't tell you the why. So, example I think I was discussing with my agency partners here today earlier was I may run a TV campaign just because running that TV campaign will incite the retailer to put more display up. And I actually get the sale from the display being in the store, but it looks like maybe the TV drove that sale. So I don't see that inside of a market mix model. The other thing that is a good thing with the market mix models, I think that what we're seeing is now as we get our market mix models back, we're building these data sets, and I think this is the point of you start to say, well, there's more and more like intermediate metrics I want to tag on as the kind of metadata to my market mix results so that I can start doing meta-analyses of, okay, we're campaigns, I'll go to the digital world. Viewability, we now have viewability metrics for digital, which is great. Well, we're campaigns that were more in view. Did those result in higher ROIs per my market mix model and higher the effectiveness of driving volume? And the answer is yes. I mean, it's kind of, that one kind of a no-brainer, but it's great to be able to create those relationships now from the intermediate data sets into the mixed data sets, which kind of tells me, like, how much volume did you drive?
Right. Catherine, where do you think the industry needs to focus most urgently then focus its development efforts? Is it on the measuring of exposure or the measuring of impact? And that may not be a fair question because you may say both, but if you had to pick one, where do you think the biggest opportunities are and challenges are?
I'm not sure how you can do one or the other.
Okay.
I mean, they're so inextricably linked, and I think what we heard about taxi this morning in terms of being able to have the foundations of it in order to be able to put them together to understand impact or not impact. So you have to know whether they were exposed to know whether it was. I just in answer to your last question before we go into that, one of the things that we've been a catalyst for is to kind of get to what you were talking about with the meta-analysis, to Jane's title for this session in terms of what works. Back in 2008, we held our first empirical generalizations in advertising conference, and we held another one just about a year ago. And the notion is, what are those sort of law-like behaviors? What are those law-like things that we can say, this is what works, and under what conditions does it work? Because it's not just one study, it's not just one finding, it's not just one aha, it's not just one, but across multiple studies, what can we really extract from that? And I see people in the room who have been part of that and put papers together. So the first Journal of Advertising Research paper, issue that came out of that, really had, I think, 21 of these pretty compelling. And we just come up with another set, the issues coming out in a couple of months. But being able to extract that, get data sets from different experiences from different, and be able to do the meta-analysis so we can sort of stand on the shoulders of what we do know already so that we're not reinventing the wheel, and then can go on to do new kind of measures.
Can you cite any examples of some of those empirical generalizations that we have learned about cross-platform effectiveness?
The winning, we did have a competition, and the winning assessment, I should check my notes here, with Dwayne Varen leading it on cross-platform. Should check my notes a little bit. Cross-media synergy effects are due to factors other than devices. Environment, content, format, modality. We'll have to get the issue to read the details. But,
just a teaser, that's
teaser.
all
Just a
you're going to
teaser.
give us. Okay. Aaron, do you agree you can't separate the importance of exposure metrics from impact metrics? I mean, if you had to pick one or the other, could you encourage the industry to focus in one place or the other?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you don't have effective advertising unless it gets in front of your audience and it convinces them to do something. It's the old reach and resonance, right, kind of thing. So it is hard to separate the two. I would be happy to have a reach metric that helps me to understand in totality. If I know that the product I'm marketing, there are 50 million women in the U.S. who are open to buying that product, I'd like to know how many of them in some way came in contact with my message, my campaign, right? And where they came in contact with that, and how many times did they come in contact with that. And then all of that becomes data that, again, I can bring back to do meta-analyses on, because at some point I will get a read of how effective was that campaign. And what I might want to know is, gee, are campaigns that have a frequency of 15 across devices those that are most effective? Or should it really only be 8? And should I, do I need to shift dollars and investments? Or do I need to go heavier? So it's hard to separate the two, but I'd like to even just get...
It's pretty foundational. You got to have that reach,
Yep.
that reach metric.
I mean, we're starting to edge there a little bit. So if you think about how data management platforms, DMPs, work on the digital side, and unfortunately it is limited to the digital side of things, but if you can start to take client first-party data, people who are regular customers, who are regular customers, and what kind of relationship you have with them when they're going to be in the market for another product. And you can marry that with third-party cookies and go out there and then serve them ads knowing that you're getting that exposure to somebody who is in the market for your product at that time, you're kind of combining the two things together in a quite effective way. That unfortunately, reach and scale are a little bit of an issue at the moment because you can't translate it to other platforms that are a bit bigger. But I mean, that is the ambition along those kind of platforms, is to tie that effect together with exposure in the same place.
Right, absolutely. Forewarned, I'm going to give you an opportunity to ask a question or two out here, so think about that in a minute. So start thinking of what your questions are. Aaron, when you and I sat next to each other in an office at Procter & Gamble a few years ago, I think it was Kim Dedeker at the time, looked at hindsight, insight, foresight, this idea of this look-back approach, the real-time, the predictive measures is, the three, what those three things were kind of meant to be.
Yeah.
And you several of you talked about real-time and real-time impact. I have this sense that perhaps the online media provide a little more short-term effect, real-time response than the offline linear TV media. It's interesting because in some ways we think of TV being the better measured media in some ways, but in fact in some other ways it's perhaps not as well measured. Reactions, I mean, is real-time more than a buzzword? And
real-time is more than a buzzword, and I mean, in my perspective, over the next 5 years, we'll see an explosion in this idea of data-driven real-time marketing. Yes, is online in an advanced place relative to TV today in terms of your ability to use data to inform buying decisions in real time? Yeah, it is. But TV is going to get there. I know Simulmedia's here, and we're already going. We've done a pilot where we did addressable television for one of our Special K ads, and got a lot of great learning out of that. That it's going to evolve, and as it evolves, the key is going to be. So I'm reading Nate Silver's The Signal and the Noise right now, right? I'm some way through that, and it's fascinating to me because I live it where we have this explosion of data, and a lot of it is noise. It's about, like, how do we, if I want to get predictive, which piece of data is the one that is most predictive? And that's the real challenge. That's the real tricky piece. Is it knowing how many people I'm hitting or where I'm hitting them? Is it knowing that I was able to drive top-of-mind awareness? Is it just the ad? How long did they spend viewing the ad? Did they see the full 30-second spot? Did they was a banner on the page 5 seconds or more? What is that signal, the true signal? And because otherwise, I may be optimizing in real time to a false signal, to noise, and I don't want to do that. So I think that's going to be one of the big challenges over the next few years. We'll continue to improve the digital advertising space because we're already there, and we've got the rise of the Lumascape. But even in TV, I think it's going to become a really big opportunity.
Yep. Rob, agree? Just a different point of view? Or?
So, I mean, I think this is part of my job. This is what I do. And I will say there is a little bit of overestimation of the quality of real-time data that you can get on the digital sphere. There's a lot of it, but and there's lots of different data points. But getting that stuff on an hourly basis piped into the cloud, so you can actually manipulate it and look at it, is fantastically hard. Because the focus of all data suppliers and vendors on the digital side of things is getting the money in, not pumping the data out. So it is quite hard to do that stuff, I will say. And on the video side of things, where you have less data points, but there's a lot more time spent perusing them and making sure that they're accurate in a real-time basis. Actually, what's important for us is to make sure they're meaningful points. But I don't discount the ability for TV and for video and some of the more traditional media to play an active role in those real-time optimizations because there's less noise and there's more if there's more reliability on that data, filtering and getting really accurate mass data from the digital side of things can be quite hard. Yeah. It's a challenge.
Just one thought on that.
All right, real quick, and then we're going to go.
Yep, just in terms of real time, there's what you talked about. I think there's also real time relevance as part of what I was talking about, so that and then real time reaction, so that you at least have a sensing culture, so that you have something in place that, in addition to the data, but also to the social sphere, the cultural sphere, and that you can have the agility in place to have that real-time reaction. So I think just as a mental model, just as a way of thinking about it, just as a sort of a corporate culture, I think those are some of the things that we do have to evolve to quickly.
Yeah.
Question? Somebody must want to ask. Yes. David. Do we need a microphone back there? No, back, other way, other way.
So my question is that we're really in a revolutionary time now where we're getting more and more data. We're trying to learn how to measure media with more and more precision. And all the work that we're doing with all these new measurement systems, really, the more we do, the more we find out that success or failure is contingent on effective, creative, and messaging.
Right.
So the question I have is, is there a parallel effort going on at the advertiser and agency level to improve the quality of the measurement of and the development process for effective the creative element? Because I think without that parallel path, the precision of the actual media measurement is not going to ever be realized. The true potential is not going to be realized.
Dave, is that question also perhaps, let me just clarify, when you think about creative development, more so on the nonlinear TV side of the cross-media platform? There are a lot of measures and processes in place to qualify copy for television. Is the question more related to the non-television parts of the cross-platform campaign?
I think it's more of a problem in that, but we find even in the television process, when we go through these elaborate models, develop these elaborate models to parse out what is working and what isn't working, the variable that ends up driving everything is the creative, and good creative works even in a badly executed media environment, whereas bad creative doesn't work no matter how well you
We got to go to you
execute the
with
media.
this question, Aaron. You got to.
It's a great question. I completely agree with David. Usually, anytime I'm talking about measurement, there's always three buckets, and the first bucket is always copy. Does my copy have the right to succeed? Does my creative set me up for success? And if you don't measure that, you're right. Then and we've got great examples of this. If we didn't measure the power of the creative from the beginning, then we get in market and we don't get the results that we were hoping for, and all of a sudden it's finger pointing and guessing, second guessing. Well, was it the creative's fault? Was it the media execution? We do know, you're exactly right, that creative is the key to any successful campaign. I think you're hitting on the right question though too, Don, is we do a lot of TV copy testing, right? All the big advertisers do, and we've gotten pretty good. I think there could be even more work done on that in terms of becoming more and more predictive. So how do I turn those copy test results into even better predictors of what's going to happen? But how do I test the creative of a mobile experience? Even website creative testing and things like that, it starts to become very costly to the advertiser or the agencies to do that. And so that we face challenges. But again, in the real-time space, if there's some signal I can hone in on and quickly iterate, then that becomes like, do I need to do copy testing or do I need to do quick iteration where I have the flexibility to do so? TV's obviously a little different, but where I have the flexibility to do so, how do I find that right signal and iterate?
Rob, I heard Randall Beard at Nielsen yesterday say that he sees some advertisers use the Darwinian method of copy testing for online ads. They'll put 10 or 12 ads on air and the survival of the fittest, whichever one works best. Do you see that among
Yeah, I was going to talk a little bit about TV actually. It's not a very cost-effective way to do things, but you certainly can start to measure through those signals from consumers the intermediate signals which we can model. So part of our modeling exercise, whether it is market mix modeling or structural equation modeling, can start to tell us, okay, when you start to run successful copy, there are intermediary signals, which is quality of interaction on the website goes up, or number of searches and successful searches amongst certain search terms may go up. And you can start to get benchmark norms for that kind of stuff. So we can start to understand, as that copy is airing, a little bit better what we should be expecting and whether we're seeing those signals work and whether consumers are really picking up. So once the copy is on air, you can start to see whether it is successful or not very quickly and start to take remedy action for that. But that is not a very effective way of doing it up front. From a digital perspective, absolutely. It's much more effective to be able to, certainly search is a great example of this, where you can start to have dynamic search ads that mold themselves to the most successful terms, and as you tie that to better targeting, so you're certainly starting to serve to the right people who are in the market for your products at that right time, and you start to amend the copy in real time towards what is most successful or not. You start to have that real-time copy optimization that we are looking for a little bit.
Jane's giving me the high sign, so if you have other questions for these people, you're going to have to grab them at cocktail hour and ask. But if you would join me in thanking Rob and Aaron and Catharine for participating in this. Thank you. All right.